All right, so hello everybody. My name is Nick Cavallano. I'm the Director of Technology at Vote America. Vote America is a new organization that works to kind of remove the barriers to voting this year using technology, and then also running a program that supports that technology is built on. So we help people request their absentee ballots, register to vote, and then we follow up with those people and make sure that they actually, get out to vote this year. And my team is responsible for building all the technology and platforms and tools that work on that. But I've actually been in this space for quite a while, and cybersecurity is something that's always been interesting to me. When I was the CTO at Organizing for Action, and Organizing for Action used to control the Barack Obama Twitter accounts and BarackObama.com. And security was really important for us. In that case, a lot of people didn't realize that at Barack Obama was not the White House. It was a bunch of 20 and 30 somethings on the West Loop of Chicago. But if, at Barack Obama had tweeted something that may have talked about an individual company or a group in another country, it may have had real world implications, both on the policy front of the White House, as well as generally the policy of the United States. So security was really important for us. And a lot of the tips that I'm bringing up today, they don't only apply to somebody who's like in that position, but they apply to individuals, campaigns, organizations, even municipalities. These are all skills that we learned and applied in that space, and we want as many people as possible to apply in all across the movement. This presentation actually goes really fast if nobody asks any questions, or really slow if people ask questions. I'd much rather not make it through this presentation than be done in 20 minutes. So please ask questions as they come along. That is that. Let's get started. So these are just 10 tips. We're going to go through 10 steps that you can follow to improve your digital security. So if we learned anything also over the past couple of years, it's not just that the threat is from a foreign power. Obviously, that's an enormous concern of foreign countries wanting to influence our democracy through hacking. But there's also attackers who would love to do things like just, steal credit cards or cause havoc or embarrass your organization. These are all big problems that are could not only embarrass or cause like operational headaches to your organization, they could actually take you away from the work that you're trying to do. They could actually, they're big time sucks, and that's what this is try to prevent. So let's talk about kind of what we can do. So here's my tip number one: use two-factor authentication. So by far the biggest risk that we face is that someone takes over a cloud-based account, like a Google account or a Facebook account or a Twitter account. These types of hacking are the most common and the biggest concern. One way to prevent that from happening is something called two-factor or multi-factor authentication. There are three factors. When you hear multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, it's helpful to know the three factors. There's something you know, which is like your password or a PIN code or something like that. There's something you are, which is generally things like your thumbprint or a scan of your face. And there's something you have, which is like your phone or they call them YubiKeys. I'll show you one. Little devices that you can insert into a USB port of your computer. This is an item I have, so that's a factor. Multi-factor authentication means that you have two of the three factors. You actually see this all throughout. And in fact, the simplest one, and this has been around forever, is a debit card. A debit card is multi-factor. You need to have the physical card to put in the ATM machine, and then you need which is factor one, and you need the information that's in your brain, the PIN code, factor two. This is just applying it to cloud-based accounts. It's a way of verifying that you are actually you. And if I could stop anybody right now and just say the one thing you need to do more than anything is to use multi-factor authentication. And there's this really useful website that I think everybody should go to called TwoFactorOFF.org, and I actually have it up on my screen right now. TwoFactorOFF.org is a place that lists all the different cloud service providers you can go to and their support of two-factor authentication, and a link to the documentation where you can go to find that information. And there's a whole bunch of things: banking, cryptocurrencies, finance, food, gaming. Gaming would be like Blizzard, who's the maker of World of Warcraft, but also, you know, your different different companies that offer financial services to you, like banking, Ally Bank. But also there's, you know, there's other providers here. There's Action Network. Action Network offers two-factor authentication. You'll see here's a link to their documentation. And here's information on how to enable and disable two-factor authentication on Action Network. You're actually going to see here a couple different tabs, and this is the method by which two-factor authentication happens. There's a bunch of different common ways that two-factor authentication can go about. You can receive an SMS code, like a one-time code via SMS. You could receive a phone call with a code. You could get an email that basically emails you and tells you to verify your account. A hardware token. A hardware token is, again, like this YubiKey. This is something you would insert into a USB drive of your computer. And then software tokens. Software tokens are things like Authy, Google Authenticator. They are, when it comes to, and then there's a last one that's not really recommended on here, and this is push notifications. So in that case, it would be something where you're trying to log into Google, you're already logged into Google on your phone, and it said, we just sent a note to your phone, press a button on your phone to allow you in. When it comes to what are the most important here for, in the way of order that I would choose, the first most noteworthy, so whenever you're dealing with a code, you're, at least for a short period of time, dealing with a piece of information that somebody could get from you. You know your password and you know that code. So if I know your password and I'm sitting next to you, I can see that code coming off of your phone, and now I have both factors. Because it fundamentally, it is two items that you know. If you're using a YubiKey or push authentication, you actually, there's no code, there's no point in the flow, in the whole flow of logging in, that involved knowing something. So that's by far the most effective. Followed up by software tokens, which are like Google Authenticator and Authy. And after that would be email, and then after that would be, SMS and phone call. The reason that I don't recommend people use SMS if another factor is available is actually pretty simple. I have a phone right here, and it has a SIM card in it. And I could call my phone company and say, I could call a phone company and say, hey, my name is Nick Catalano, even if I'm Nick Catalano, and I lost my phone, or I lost the SIM card in my phone, or the SIM card doesn't work in my phone, and somebody stole it and it's off, and you know, can you guys help me? I have this other phone and this other SIM card already in front of me. Can you guys just deactivate that old SIM card and activate the account on my phone? And Verizon or whoever will say, sorry to hear that, you know, Mr. Catalano, it's, you know, this happens all the time, but, you know, it's good to know. Can you verify some information for me? Can you verify the last 4 digits of your social security number? Well, my information has been stolen, and I'm sure everybody's information has been leaked a million times by now. So the last 4 digits of my social security number aren't exactly impossible for a really dedicated hacker to find. And they may ask, what street did you grow up on? And well, that's also probably not super hard to figure out. And what's your mother's maiden name? Well, that information is also determined, can also be determined. And they're like, okay, Mr. Catalano, here, your phone number is now on this new phone. If I know my password, and I've convinced Verizon, which again, I only needed a couple pieces of information, that this phone is now my phone. The text messages will no longer come to my phone, and they will come to the attacker's phone. It's very common. It happens quite a bit. It's a big concern. That's why I always recommend, if possible, go with the hardware token, followed up by Google Authenticator or Authy. Google Authenticator and Authy, I actually usually recommend Authy. And the reason I usually recommend Authy is more a convenience thing than a security thing. That's not to say Google Authenticator isn't secure. It absolutely is. But Authy also lets you back up your two-factor codes. So if for some reason you lose your phone, you don't instantly lose all your codes. That password should not be something that, it should be unique. The password for your two-factor code should be unique. You know, I actually have it as a very long, well, I store it very securely. It's definitely something that I control very, very closely. But that's why I usually recommend Authy. The other thing is some services, like Action Network in particular, will require you to have Authy. They use a special feature on Authy that requires you to have it. So you're going to have Authy on your phone anyway. That's something I'd recommend. And then, you know, followed up by that push notification and that push format. So definitely take a look at that. If I could, you know, push anything for everybody on this webinar, looking at this video, two-factor authentication would be it. Step 2 is pretty easy. Keep your operating systems up to date. When you see an update to your computer, it says, you know, we have updates for your computer. What you'll see on the first screen when you view the update notes are all the new features you're about to get. So all the things you can, all the features you're gonna get, all the bug fixes, and things. And at the bottom of that update usually is a little link, and it's a link to a page like this. About the security contents of macOS Catalina 10.15.4, Security Update 2020-02 for macOS Mojave, and Security Update 2020-02 for High Sierra. These are the same things that were included in that update. And if you scroll down, you'll see things like, let's see, these are all different exploits that people determined that were reported to Apple and not generally known, usually very rarely known by the public before this release was done. And here's one for call history. It applies for macOS Catalina 10.15.3. The impact is a malicious application should be able to access a user's call history. This issue was addressed by the update. And it lists to, a big thing in security is giving credit to people who find it. You know, it's pretty cool. As somebody who's found like a security bug before, it's actually really cool to see your name like on one of these websites. But you know, this was not publicly known, and now there's a patch out in the wild to fix it. If you know this exploit happens, because you'd know it because you saw the release happen, and you knew that somebody had an operating system that was not on this version, you could go and find out what this exploit was and use it to get into the phone, get into the device. This is really simple, but keep your stuff up to date. Even if you're afraid that you're gonna see some sort of, color change or something, the security updates alone are worth it. That's really simple. You can turn on automatic updates. Chrome has an automatic update. Actually, if you're like me and you don't restart Chrome fast enough, you'll see a little alert icon on the top right here, on the top right next to where my photo is. That will alert you with like a red or a yellow up arrow. That means that Chrome should be updated. But you also get those alerts on your phone and your email. Very, very common. So it's a pretty simple way to go about it. Here's the next thing. Be careful authorizing access to your accounts. Applications or plugins that interact with your email or interact with your Google Drive, or even interact with like your contacts on your phone. They may tell you they're only going to do one thing. Most common is like a social media service that says, give us access to your phone's contacts so that we can determine who, give us access to your phone contacts so that we can figure out which of your friends are on the social network. I've taken a look at what's all in my contact book, at least what an application could see. In there are photos of my friends, their addresses, their phone numbers, where they work, and all this other information about my friends. This was all in my contact list. So while that app only said that it cared about finding people on the service who are also on the service, they also got the birth date of my, of my brother. If they're trying to get into my brother's account, they now have the information because it was swiped through the contact information. So be very careful. If you are seeing if you're not familiar with a provider or you're not sure that a provider absolutely needs access to for a certain piece of information, just don't allow it. Don't enable it. Don't do. With that in mind, I also do think some of the services like Login with Google are pretty good. So just be pretty explicit about when you see a page like this pop up. What exactly permissions are being asked for? Do you trust this organization? Because many times you don't know what exactly is coming, what exactly people are asking for. Yeah, this applies both to your phone and your web services. Very common way that accounts are taken over. And also, when you authorize things, you're not only authorizing things now. When you're saying, hey, go find my contacts now who are current members, that app many times still has access to your data going forward as well. So every time you open up the app, if they still have that privilege, then they're going to be able to see all the updates and send them wherever they want. And that's a big thing. So definitely be careful there. Great. Let's talk about number 4. Use a password manager. So a password manager, the most common ones are 1Password, LastPass, Dashlane, KeyPass. A password manager is basically a big directory book of passwords, of your passwords. I talk about it a little later, but I'll also talk about it now. You shouldn't reuse passwords. Passwords are stolen all the time. You hear constantly that that LinkedIn was hacked or some other group was hacked. You should assume that whatever password you have with that account has been compromised. And you should assume that when somebody needs to break into your account on another service, the first password they're not going to check is password. The first password they're going to check is a password you've used on another site that's been compromised. So using different accounts is definitely what's important. So I get a question, is it okay to use recording or PowerPoint after? Absolutely. There's a full blog post with all of these tips that will be on the web, and I highly encourage you to share this information. Password managers are also really useful so a password manager is a place where you could have a bunch of really random passwords, and then you only have to remember one password. And it's the master vault password for your password manager. The other big advantage of this, and this is why I love 1Password, and this is why I use it at our organization, is you can have something called vaults. Vaults and 1Password are basically collections of passwords that you can share with other members of your team. And I also talk about this a little later, but the idea is that you can share your Twitter password with your social media team. My team is the developer team, so our web hosting logins are shared with the web hosting team, the developer team. Basically, we can segment off, and you can share all these. And the advantage of a service like LastPass or 1Password or anything is they are so secure that even the company 1Password cannot see your passwords. They are designed so that if you use a password manager, This also means that if you lose your password, it's your master password, it's actually extraordinarily hard to get into the account. So make sure the master password is something that is unique but very memorable. It also helps if you use it on a day-to-day basis, because then you always remember the password. The other big advantage of this, and people don't talk about it as much for password managers, is it actually is a good way to keep away from phishing. I'm currently on docs.google.com. And I use LastPass. I use LastPass for my personal use, and I use 1Password for professional purposes. I'll probably switch to 1Password at some point, but I have like 1,000 passwords in LastPass, and I haven't seen a huge need to switch my personal stuff. But you'll see, oh, I have 16 accounts. So I actually help a good number of people manage their G Suite accounts, which means I have a bunch of logins to Google. If somebody sends me to a page that looks like Google, but it's not Google, it's going to show up as, it's not going to offer to pre-fill any of the passwords, any of the 16 passwords that I have available. And I'm going to know pretty quick that that's not actually Google. It may look like Google, but it's not Google. Using the browser extension of your password manager is actually a really good way to kind of prevent that. Password managers, really important. Making sure that your team uses them. Another big advantage of 1Password, I talked about that two-factor authentication, those, what are they listed here? Those software tokens, which are that Google Authenticator ones. You can actually add a two-factor authentication code generator to 1Password, which is really useful if you're sharing with your team access to an account. Of course, also if you're sharing passwords with your team's only as secure as the weakest weakest password of any member of your vault. So definitely make sure that you have a good standard across your organization on password safety. So definitely let me know if there's any questions there. What is a good password? So a good password is, first of all, it's something you can remember. Really, the worst password possible is the password that you are constantly forgetting. Then it's not a very good password. It's just a good way to lock you out of your accounts. The second best password is something that's long and random, but still meaningful to you, like meaningful in a way that you could remember it. What a lot of people don't realize is that in many cases, there's actually no maximum length of a password. Nobody says it has to be 12 characters. They just say it has to be a minimum of 12 characters. So you could use a whole sentence. You could use 10 words. You could use something that's really meaningful to you. Like, don't use Mary had a little lamb, because Mary had a little lamb is going to be a pretty common password. But you could have a sentence that's meaningful to you, but just complete random for other people. There's no maximum length. So when choosing your master password, definitely keep that in mind, but there's no maximum length. A good way of doing this, and this is from a website called XKCD, is taking random words that don't mean anything, usually random nouns. And if you have random proper nouns, you can actually do things like, in this case, the top thing, Troubadour and 3. These are all, this is a pretty easy one for a computer to brute force or guess one after another. This is a pretty easy password. But correct horse battery staple, that's, first of all, that's really memorable. Like, you could think of, if you look over here on the right, you can see a photo of, you know, a horse and a battery and a staple. That's a long phrase, really hard to guess. It'd be really hard to know. You wouldn't know ahead of time. So that's basically using a strong password that is long and random, but still memorable is what you're going to want to do. And then inside your password manager, you want to have extraordinarily long and random passwords on a per service basis. These are passwords you should never have to memorize. These are passwords that should annoy the heck out of your family if they ever ask you to use your network's password. This is, if you have a significant other, you don't want to access your password, just have your password for Netflix. Just be like, oh, it's really complicated. It's on my phone. It takes forever. It's going to be so hard to get into. You don't want to do it. You don't want to deal with it. It's a great way to get yourself out of helping your father get into a Netflix account. I love you, Dad. I have a question here. You mentioned YubiKeys for TwoFactorOFF, and I need a different one. Do I need a different one for each of my accounts, like one for Gmail, one and one for Facebook one? YubiKeys are secure. They are completely. It is possible to use one YubiKey for as many services as possible as you need. They're designed in a certain way where even if you used your YubiKey with Facebook and you used the same YubiKey with Google wouldn't be able to determine the YubiKey, wouldn't be able to generate, wouldn't be able to spoof that YubiKey to get into Facebook. They're all designed that way so that it's very much unique based on the math that's used to generate the codes. Is kept separate. So yeah. So that's master passwords. Let's talk about the next one. This goes back to kind of what we were talking about before. Never reuse passwords, just don't. Passwords are stolen all the time. You should assume, like, all the time. You are only as secure as the worst tech team, worst security team that has access to that password. As somebody who has a security team and cares about passwords a lot, we spend a significant amount of time worried about this. This is like one of my biggest, anytime our team does anything with passwords or credentials or personal information, we are extra sensitive. But no individual service is perfect. At a certain point, some are going to be compromised. If one is compromised, your password is compromised as well. We also store passwords in a way that makes it extraordinarily hard to reverse engineer and figure out what the actual raw password is. So that's really nice. Even if somebody did steal all of our database, they wouldn't be able to figure out which passwords there are. But that's not a universal rule. Like there's no tech god in the world. There's no software god in the world saying that, we absolutely have to store passwords that way. So definitely, and feel free to bring up any questions you have in the Q&A or the chat. I noticed one question: you can call your provider and add a SIM password pin, so you can't make any changes without that unique code. That's true. A SIM password is really useful. That's going to be more useful than just like your social security number. One other flag is if you are on a family plan for your cell phone service, in many cases, you'll have to check with your provider. I think this constantly changes. The ability to kind of like navigate your way into an account is a little different. I know one thing, when you upgrade your account, and a lot of times they ask you for your account PIN, and then when you're trying to upgrade your phone, and then you call your parents and you're like, okay, here's your PIN, and then you call your sister and here's your PIN or whatever. Like every time you're providing those codes, you're also touching a code that could be used to compromise your phone number. So the number of times you have to deal with that code, the amount of the care that you're going to do it, especially when you're dealing with things like phone numbers where you're dealing with like other people who may not be as tech savvy as you are. It's all a very good reason to use software tokens or hardware YubiKeys. But yeah, absolutely add a SIM password pin for your accounts. Absolutely important. And going back to this slide, never reuse passwords. Make sure all your passwords are unique. Your password managers can generate random passwords for you. Be careful when you generate a random password from your password manager that you don't then generate another random password and overwrite the random password you just used. It's from mistakes. I have screwed up creating accounts before because I pressed buttons too fast. I'm better at it now. But definitely, find a workflow that's possible for you to generate random passwords and copy them in using your code, and then store those in your password manager and import them. Number 7, only give account access to employees and volunteers who actually need it. I can't count the number of times that somebody has come to me and said, hey, this volunteer just left, or this volunteer, this employee just left for any number of reasons. And they have access to all our passwords and we're worried about them. And I'm like, all right, what passwords do they have access to? All of them. At that point, you're in a race against the person. Even if you revoke access to one password from an employee or volunteer, you have to assume that all those passwords were copied down by that user. Like, you can't assume that they didn't copy and paste out of the password manager. Even when you use things like sharing passwords so that it autofills, the browser autofills, at a certain point, there was a point where that password was on a person's computer in a unencrypted fashion. There's no way for sure that you can be absolutely 100% sure that that password is not still in the possession of the person who left. The way of dealing with this is by simply not giving out the passwords to people who don't need them. 1Password vaults are phenomenal. Vaults basically let us, again, segment off and have it so that our communications team has access to Twitter, our development team has access to the servers. Development team can't go into the Twitter account. The Twitter team can't go into the software account. It's going to make your life, and then also make sure that password and access revoking those is part of your offboarding checklist. Dealing with HR issues can be really sensitive, obviously your HR team wants to loop in as few people as possible when making decisions regarding employee access. There should still, as part of the checklist, somebody at the organization who has the knowledge of how to revoke and change passwords should be part of that flow. That's definitely something. It's a sensitive thing. It's always a conversation I have to have with whoever does operations for the organization, because again, you want to keep that, you want to scope those decisions down tightly. But again, password access is very important. I've run into this problem before. In cleaning up issues like that, cleaning up where you had a rogue former volunteer or employee go after your accounts, it can be extraordinarily damaging to your organization. It's actually, I don't see a lot of people having their accounts compromised. It's actually somewhat rare, especially because people follow these tips usually if they're in my life. But I do see people having former employees and volunteers get into their accounts because they didn't properly revoke or change access. It's a sensitive topic, but it's something you should absolutely keep in mind. Here's a simple one. Never share passwords via unencrypted email. Email is not secure. It's not. You need to assume that someday somebody's going to get into your email. You just needs to be okay with a stranger seeing that email. There are people who like to email me passwords, email me, say, the username in one email and then the password in another email, and said, hey, I didn't include it in the same email address. Well, guess what? I use Gmail. Both of your emails from me grouped right next to one another. You didn't tell me, you didn't use anything that was even remotely secure to send me that password. Assume that someday, and then I go and complain at them and say, you need to send it to me in a more secure way. I'm not using your service if you don't do that. Which usually is a good way to get a vendor to pay attention. Assume that someday email's going to get broken into, and you're okay with the stranger. You need to be okay with the stranger seeing something. Now, sharing passwords via encrypted messenger like iMessage or Signal is one solution to this. One thing that I do, and then there's also a service called One Time Secret that I use to pass some credentials along. but it's nothing as good as just storing in your vault, your 1Password vault. And that's definitely going to be what you want. And definitely send those across. And if you are going to send a password across on email, we do have a platform where we do send passwords across via Slack to get people into their accounts. The expectation is I immediately send a link to the password reset page when I provide the password. And if they don't reset the password within a certain number of minutes, I revoke the access. But if it's an especially sensitive account, somebody needs to hop on the phone with me and I'll only send it via Signal. And then I also instruct them to reset the password. There really should be very few instances. Honestly, there are very few instances where passwords should be shared in the first place, except for services where users of multi-accounts are not possible. So definitely keep an eye on that. There's no really clean way of sharing passwords in the world. There's no real clean way of two people having the same password. It's just something you run into quite a bit. Cybersecurity and physical device security go hand in hand. So secure your devices. So one thing that I could have, I usually start this presentation with, and I left it out now, but I'll bring it back up, is this presentation is very much different. There's a different conversation to be had if your threat is some external person not near you, not physically near you, or who cannot physically intimidate you, like a foreign hacker or somebody trying to embarrass you. That's really who stopping those people is who this conversation is about. If you're talking about somebody physically taking your device by force and then somehow compromising you that way, which may be somebody in a as part of a law enforcement, that's a different discussion and that's for this reason. If your device goes missing or is physically taken over, your entire world changes. Like the device is physically in somebody's hand. One way to deal with that is to enable disk encryption by default on your computer. That makes it so you need a password to get into the device. Make sure that Find My iPhone or their similar Android devices are turned on. I do this so that if a device gets stolen, I can remotely wipe it. For phones that I actually control, say that my organization issues, we have it set up so that in G Suite, you can actually have it so that the organization manages the device. And that lets the organization wipe the device if it's reported stolen. But you can do the same service yourself using Find My iPhone or Find My Android. Always lock your devices with strong passcodes when using them. But really, physical device security and other device security is really important. So number 10, install an ad blocker. So you're going to see, you'll see in this space a lot of conversations about Google and Facebook ads and how great Google and Facebook ads are. And they're great. I use them all the time. It's a sizable source of traffic for our organization. Facebook ads or Google ads have been extraordinarily successful for us. But when you view a banner ad on a website, it is not necessarily true that that banner ad was purchased through Google or Facebook. There are hundreds of different organizations that could have bought that advertisement and decided what that advertisement looks like. It is possible, if in certain circumstances, for ads to have viruses or malware inserted into them. Usually your browser like Chrome or Firefox or Safari will be really good at stopping that. But again, as I talked earlier about those security warnings and security alerts, same thing happens with Chrome. You'll see alerts pop up. Install an ad blocker. Get familiar with the ad blocker. Get familiar with when you need to turn off your ad blocker. Again, there is a conversation when you get to yeah, make sure you are familiar with your ad blocker. When you start talking about running Google and Facebook ads, you're going to run into the problem where you're installing an ad blocker while trying to run ads. One option there is to create new Chrome profiles for when you run ads and when you don't run ads. Definitely something that you wanna keep an eye on. Or you can learn to disable your ad blocker. Something that you're gonna want. This is actually a great question. Don't ad blocking extensions get access to your browsing history? What guarantees them that they won't share that information with anyone or abuse it themselves? This is a tough one. This is a really tough one. When you install an extension on your browser, you are exposing information in your browser to that extension. There's a certain level of control that that an extension developer can limit. So say I have an extension, I don't use a lot of extensions, but say you have an extension that like only deals with Reddit. Like it's possible for the extension to only have access to Reddit. But in the case of ad blocks, it's ad blockers, it has to have access to the entire web. I recommend in here uBlock Origin because I've found them to be, I and other people in this space have found them to be the most reliable of them, least likely to pass data back to their servers. There are other services such as AdBlock Plus. AdBlock Plus is a fine service, but they're a little bit more commercial than uBlock Origin. They've been more willing to let certain ads through, and there's some definite concerns there. Extensions are a big concern. You know, anytime you give access to an extension access to your web browser, that extension is able to scrape contents of your web browser. Web browsers are also really good at, but web browsers also realize this. So there is certain levels of access and security control built into extensions. So that is definitely something. And I'll do one more slide before we get to a Q&A. And I hope that answered that question. Here's a bonus. Use Signal Messenger. Signal Messenger offers end-to-end encryption and message expiration. End-to-end encryption is when I send you a message on Google Hangouts or Slack or anything, there are 3 people that can access that message. They're me, there's the recipient, and there's Slack or Google or whatever the provider is. End-to-end encryption changes it so that that middleman, Slack or Google or whatever, cannot actually read the contents of the message. That's definitely something you're gonna want. So Signal's a great one. You also can do Signal, can do message expiration. I set this on all my contacts when I send messages. The best way to keep information secure is to not have it in the first place. Definitely use message expiration when you can. Great. So let's start Q&A. First of all, you can read and share this blog post, and I'll leave this up for a little while as I go into Q&A. You also can email me, or you can hit me up on Twitter. So let's do some questionnaires. Do you recommend any other browsers like Brave? I actually do. I think Brave and certain services are great. I am personally not an enormous user of Brave, but this also comes down to kind of like, what is your threat model? You know, if you are seriously worried about your device being stolen or taken over or anything, like there's a really good excuse to use Brave. You know, I use Chrome because I also do a lot of web development. So having access to the Chrome browser is really important for me. it really, it's not bad. It's not a bad thing to use Brave and Tor, but you just realize what you're getting yourself into there. It's just going to limit your ability to do things a little bit more. And it looks like Brave is owned by anti-progressives Peter Thiel. So don't use Brave. I'm not as familiar with Brave. I'm more familiar with Tor and services like that. I use Chrome. But at a certain point, you also realize if you use Chrome, you're technically giving support to Google, who's not great themselves. So, web browsers are a landmine. Let's see, other questions here. With remote work due to COVID-19, a lot of people are using personal computers, Wi-Fi. Do you recommend using antivirus softwares like Bitdefender, or even a physical service like Bitdefender Box to secure your entire home? I have a really hard time with this question. I use Bitdefender personally because I'm very afraid of someone taking over my different backups. But I'm kind of like waffling on it. I know in the case of Windows, there's Windows Defender who will take care of some of the on-device hacking. It won't hurt to use Bitdefender, but it's not, it's certainly not an excuse to not do things like have two-factor authentication or more secure passwords on all of your stuff. It's kind of like an add-on. It's like an extra plus to it, but it's not nearly going to help you nearly as much as using like a password manager. So let's see. Here's a question from a little bit earlier. Let's see. Not sure if this is a cybersecurity question within your slides, but when you do a Q&A, do you have any advice for dealing with troll impersonates you, or at least your nickname and display photo on social media to post threats against you or impersonate you? I think that you are, in a lot of cases with like cloud providers, you are at the mercy of the provider and what their terms are. This is definitely something where I would look up I would contact the provider. It's probably how you're gonna want to do. Do you have any suggestions for encrypting documents stored in Google? If you want to use Google to do like editing and Google Docs to do live editing, you're always going to run into the situation where Google's going to have access to it. It's kind of by the nature, Dropbox paper, stuff like that. You can use things like GPG to encrypt the individual files, but then that prevents you from being able to edit them inside the Google interface. It really comes down to what your threat is. At a certain point, I trust Google to have their security, but you have to balance collaboration with ease of use. Slack is a certain thing. Even if you're a very secure thing, at a certain point you have to trust Slack security. But I definitely trust Slack security or Google security more than some random other service. But yeah, if you really want to encrypt files on Google Drive, you'd want to use something like GPG and encrypt them locally. I think that is my time. If anybody has any other questions, please send me an email or hit me up on Twitter, and definitely share this blog post with as many people as you possibly can. I harass so many people in my life with this link. It's if you know me, you're going to get you may see this link show up in your inbox every so often. So definitely thank you all for being at the presentation today. And sorry if I couldn't get to your question today. All right, have a good one.
Thanks everyone for participating. Hope you have a really wonderful rest of this year's Netroots, and go forth and be amazing. We really believe in you, which is why people like Nick drop what they're doing and invest the time. And your questions and directions that you've led the conversation today have been incredibly important. Thanks so much. I'm going to close this right now so that the next group can join. And please enjoy the rest of Netroots and have a wonderful year. We hope to see you next year.